Hello and welcome everyone to this special event in aid of and in celebration of the Transylvanian Book Festival. My name is Bronwyn Riley and I'm the director of the festival, which I helped to run with Lucy Abel-Smith, the festival's founding spirit and presiding genius. We are enormously grateful for all the help and support that the Romanian Cultural Institute in London has shown us, particularly in helping to put this evening's event online. We are also incredibly grateful to all the people who have given their time and their talents so freely this evening. Thank you. I would now like to invite the Romanian Ambassador to Britain, Mr. Dan Mihalecki, to say a few words and open this online event, followed by our British Ambassador in Bucharest, Mr. Andrew Noble, who is speaking to us today from the garden of the British Embassy in Bucharest.
So greetings from Bucharest, and I'm really sorry that I can't be with you this evening for what I think promises to be a really fun event. The Transylvania Book Festival is one of those very bright lights for 2021 that I can already see twinkling at me through the relative gloom that we're going through with this epidemic. Lucy and Bron, we missed you terribly this September, but the prospect of next year in Rikish is of an event which will help us get through, I think, this challenging winter. I hope lots of old and new friends are going to join us there, and of course it is an event which is attracting a great deal of attention, including at the very highest levels here in Romania. I'm certain, from what I know of thinking about the programme, that it's going to be the most interesting yet. This fourth festival, I think, Transylvania Book Festival is already on the map. This is going to really be a very important gathering. I would encourage anybody who can get there to get there for this 4 days in Transylvania, and anybody who's in a position to help support its preparation, especially financially. That would be really good to be able to help the planning go forward quickly and very smoothly. 2020 is the year in which we're celebrating the 140th anniversary of bilateral diplomatic relations between Romania and the UK. But 2021 is the year in which I'm looking forward to being in Rikish with the Transylvania Book Festival. And I'd just like to give you something we've spotted in the garden since we've been out here. There's already some signs of hope. Our roses, as you will see, are refusing to give up. They're battling through, and here we are with new growth. And I think that's the image we'll leave you with when we're thinking about the Transylvania Book Festival. Thanks very much.
What is it that makes the Transylvanian Book Festival so loved and so special? I, of course, am biased, so I looked through some of the fan mail from people who'd been to the festival in the previous years, and I thought I'd just read you a few extracts. I've never been to anything quite like it before. The amazing collection of people, the lack of division between speakers and audience, the beauty of the music and the fun of the picnic, the new friendships that were struck, the conversations I had and the things I learned, and of course the late nights in the gypsy bar. Was it real or far, far away in the imagination? Back home now, the whole 5 days a golden dream, every moment glowing and shimmering in the last days of summer, onto an amazing disparate group of people, every type and combination, interacting with pleasure, so happy to be there, and I think fascinated by Rickish, but also the high emotional and intellectual content of the talks. This has been, quite simply, the best and most inspiring literary festival I've ever attended. But more even than the readings, what has made it special has been the beauty of the countryside, the warmth of the locals, and, dare I say it, the incredible cheapness of Romanian beer. There's a poem which I think summarises what's so special about the villages, written by Ana Blandiana, who's one of the leading contemporary writers in Romania today, a great poet, essayist and political figure. And she has very kindly agreed to deliver this poem for us from Bucharest in Romania. It's called Dintr-n Sat, From a Village, and Lucy Abel-Smith will read the translation in English after Anna's read for us in Romanian.
Dintr-un sat. Fiecare venim dintr-un sat, unii direct, alții trecând prin părinți, unii direct purtători de resuri și basme, fericiții putând să se întoarcă oricând, alții trecând prin părinți rătăciți pe crengile sângelui depărtate subțiri, în loc de pășuni și semințe și cai, cunoscând alcoolul cuvântului extras din acestea. Vreau drumul părinților mei să-l întorc, vreau satul cu sunetul lacrimei mele, poteca din holde știută din somn și reintrarea vorbelor în lucruri. Să intru în cimitirul cu crucile căzute și cunoscându-mi pașii asemenea cu ai lor, să se încălcească în rădăcini străbunii, bolborosind cuvinte de patimă în somn. Dar n-are cine-mi spune de unde vin. Doar seara, când trec pe bulevarde, îmi simt apropiați portarii metafizici lângă intrări de blocuri, precum la porți, pe laviți, într-un sat.
Ana Blandiana's poem, From a Village, takes us to the heart of the matter. It is no accident at all that we hold the Transylvanian Book Festival in the centre of a number of villages and village life. Its importance, of course, was seen too clearly by Ceausescu when he tried to destroy so many in his system of so-called systemization of destruction of the villages. I'm reading this translation from Anna's poem in the middle of Quennington village and in our churchyard there, with my back against the Coronation of the Virgin, the south door. We all come from a village, some directly, others through their parents, some directly, bearers of myths and fairy tales. The lucky ones able to go back when they wish. Others, through their parents, get lost along the slender, distant branches of the blood, rather than pastures, seeds, and horses they know, the alcohol of the words extracted from them. I want to retrace my parents' steps. I want the village with the sound of my tear, the pathway through the fields of sheep, and the return of words into things. I want to visit the cemetery with fallen crosses and know that my footsteps are the same as theirs, and twine them into my ancestors' roots, murmuring impassioned words in my sleep. But no one can tell me where I came from. Only at night, when I wander the streets, do I feel close to the metaphysical doorman waiting at the entrances of buildings, as though waiting on the benches of a village.
Music is an incredibly important part of the festival, and we always try to enjoy a varied programme, including classical music, klezmer, gypsy music, folk music, and music from the German-Saxon tradition. Today we are very lucky to have Leona Krasi and Mircea Balei, two musicians who were born in Transylvania and who studied at that great university city of Cluj. Today they live and work and play in London, and they are going to play for us today a piece by that great Romanian composer George Enescu, entitled Concert Piece for Viola and Piano. Sitting together and sharing delicious local food in wonderful historic settings, outside usually in the wonderful September sunlight, is one of the undoubted highlights of our festival. We've invited Dagmar Dussel, a Transylvanian Saxon who emigrated with her family to Germany in 1985, to share with us some of the secrets of her family recipe book, and also to make for us a local dish.
Hello, My name is Dagmar Dusil and I come from Romania, the country I'm still in love with, although I have been living in Germany for more than 35 years. Today I would like to present you the book Looking Back Through the Kitchen Window. What is it about? This is a book about my travel from east to west. It is also an imaginary trip back to my childhood, as well as a culinary trip, as it is accompanied by memories and happenings related to the taste and sense of certain foods. This trip took me to the faraway city of my childhood, beyond the forest, into a mysterious land that once had the sign of immutability. My roots are in southeastern Europe, in a city called Hermannstadt in German, Sibiu in Romanian, and Nagyszeben in Hungarian. Nationalities used to live alongside one another with their different customs and lifestyles. My family brought me up to be quite open-minded. I was raised to meet people without any prejudices. This book would never have been written without my daughter Beate. When I asked her what she would like as a wedding gift, she answered, "Please write down for me the recipes used by Omi and by your grandmother." I sat down with all the pages that had been torn out of my mother's cookbook in front of me. We had not been allowed to take anything written out of Romania when we left. So my mother tore out the pages of the book and had someone send her the sheets by mail after she had arrived in Germany. I had these tattered pages and started gluing together again my childhood together with my youth and my mature years, my conflicts and my dreams. And I suddenly realized that the recipes would be incomplete without their stories. I was back looking through the kitchen window. And now I'm going to prepare an eggplant salad for you. We have also a story in the book that is very nice and interesting and sounds quite unreal, and it is called Eggplant Magic. For an eggplant salad, you need eggplants. Grill the eggplants over an open flame. In my kitchen, I haven't an open flame, so I grilled them in the oven. The next step is to peel the scorched skin. It goes quite easy. So here we have the peeled eggplants. Next we take a knife. My mother used a wooden knife. I haven't one, so I take a usual knife and I chop them well. The next step is to stir them with oil. You stir them well until they are smooth. I take sunflower oil because I've tried once using olive oil and the eggplant salad was unfortunately bitter. So now they are smooth. We add chopped onion, and we season with salt. So, and now I wish you bon appetit.
And now Mark Almond, lecturer in modern history at Oxford, journalist, and the author of an absolutely gripping biography of the Ceausescus, is going to pose the question, and I hope answer it: when did Romania stop being communist? Mark.
I'm Mark Almond, and I used to visit Ceausescu's Romania in the 1980s to try to help some dissidents there. And recently I've been writing a book, History of Post-Communist Romania. And that raises the question, when did Romania cease to be communist? And I think many people will say, but we remember. The whole world watched the revolution in Bucharest and in the rest of Romania in 1989 at Christmas, when the dictator Nicolae Ceausescu was suddenly confronted by dissent on the street beneath him in the Great Square in front of the Central Committee building, the place where he had given a great speech, 1968, which had in many ways made him almost popular among Romanians as a person who seemed to defy the Soviet Union and its allies in invading Czechoslovakia, and saying that his Romania wouldn't cooperate or collaborate with that kind of repression. And now, 21 years later, he was suddenly faced by the humiliation of people shouting him down. And so, for many people in the wider world, the Romanian Revolution at Christmas 1989 was in some ways a classic revolution. Elsewhere, in East Berlin and Prague, even in neighboring Bulgaria, the communist regime had died with a whimper. The old regime had simply resigned and gone into retirement. Whereas in Romania, something more like Paris in 1789 or Petrograd in 1917 had taken place. Great crowds swirling in the streets, attempts at repression, shooting of innocent people, of demonstrators, and then culminating, of course, in the execution of the tyrant and his wife, and that, in a sense, bringing apparently to a satisfying culmination the revolution. That, in a sense, was the perspective in the wider world in the West. But actually in Romania, quite quickly, questions began to be raised. People said, well, who are the new government? Who are the people who have taken power and saved the country from the dictator and the communist regime, the so-called National Salvation Front? And for many Romanians, at least certainly for Romanians that I knew, intellectuals and so on, the names of the new acting president, Ion Iliescu, his prime minister, Petre Roman, and others, spokesman for the regime, Silviu Brucan, were well known, because Ion Iliescu had been for many years the number two to Ceausescu before he fell from grace and went into obscurity in the middle 1980s. Petre Roman's family had been important. His father had been one of the founders of the feared Securitate, the secret police, whose members in December 1989 seemed to be shooting at the demonstrators, trying to suppress and save the demonstrations and save the revolution. Silviu Brucan had been the editor of the Communist Party newspaper. So there were people who said, is this really such a change? Perhaps behind all the sounding fury, the drama of the revolution in the streets, there had been really a palace coup, a backdoor revolution in which one group of members of the old elite, the Communist Party, had simply pushed aside and got rid of the current leader. And that cynicism about what had seemed such a dramatic revolution was a factor in some ways in poisoning and certainly in complicating the changes in Romania after the end of communism as a formal system in 1989, compared with countries I was talking about earlier, places like Poland, Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria. Because there was a gulf, if you like, between many ordinary people for whom the Ceausescu regime had been a period of
intensifying poverty and destitution, terrible shortages. I remember as a visitor to Ceausescu's Romania, even a Westerner with hard currency would have difficulty finding something edible, because such was the degree to which the regime had squeezed the life out of the economy, was exporting foodstuffs in order to import things for its own grand mad projects, the huge architectural transformation of central Bucharest, the destruction of much of the old central city to replace it with the boulevard of the victory of socialism and the enormous House of the People, or Palace of the Republic as it's now called. And so for many people, the regime was hated because it had ground them into the dust, and its fall was actually followed quite quickly by symbols of change. You know, we in the West may not understand this, but to be able to buy bananas or even avocado was a dramatic symbolic change, and certainly life seemed to improve. But many, particularly students and intellectuals, felt that this hadn't been a great change, and so in the spring of 1990, one saw demonstrations against the new government, saying that it was really just the communists in power under a new name. And this culminated after the elections, which Ionescu was supposed to run in May 1990, with a violent backlash. But this time, it wasn't secret policemen and so on who suppressed the demonstrations and sent the students home with bloody heads. It was miners who came down from the pits of the Jew Valley and so on to, in their mind, support their government against people who are criticising, support the government, the people who they saw as the heroes of the revolution, who had got rid of Ceausescu and his dictatorship, which had made their lives misery. And that clash, if you like, between those who were the ordinary population, who had in a sense always been outside the system, not really part of the communist regime, but who felt that that anybody who got rid of Ceausescu and his immediate coterie must be a good thing, and then those people in Bucharest questioning the legitimacy of the new government, was symbolic of a deep division. But it also then raises the question, if we say that the people who run the new government had often held positions under the old regime, at least not so long ago, of seniority, what does that mean about the change of system? And I think it can be all too tempting to think, oh, well, people don't change. The leopard doesn't change his spots. For instance, I remember in 2004, during the presidential election in those days, the preferred successor to Ionescu, who had come back as president being re-elected, you can see the election, Adrian Nastase, was debating on television with his rival Traian Băsescu, of Bucharest. And Nastase wanted to emphasize the complete distance between himself and Băsescu by saying, we have nothing in common. And Băsescu looked at him and said, oh, well, Adrian, we have at least one thing in common. We were both members of the party in the past. And yet, neither of them, Mr. Băsescu perhaps more obviously with his commitment to Western values and support for liberal reforms and EU entry and so on, but even Mr. Nastase couldn't really be said to have been operating like communist politicians had done from the late 40s after the Red Army had more or less installed the regime down to 1989. And so it's, I think, a bit of a mistake to think, oh, because somebody had been in the party back under Ceausescu, who was in power for so long from 1965 onwards, that somehow or other they were always imbued with those ideas. Of course, it's not easy to escape from our past or any others, but equally things change. And I think as we look back from the perspective of a generation on since the upheavals in 1989, what is perhaps striking is how far and how dramatically things have changed. Which doesn't say that Romania hasn't had problems, of course, since 1989, but in practice we've seen elections repeatedly, we've seen changes of government, which seems to me to be the central change that those in power could lose, and also sometimes after a short interval of a parliament come back because the voters decide. And for all the scandals that accompany Romanian political life, in some ways these are symptoms of a much more dynamic and lively system than could possibly have been imagined in the 1980s, when a sense of greyness and oppression was almost physical, could almost touch the degree to which people were cautious and afraid of the regime. And now there's a much more colourful life. as I say, sometimes scandalous, but at the same time, that is a symptom of there being vivacity rather than the degree of control that existed and the suppression of almost any spontaneity that the regime went in for before 1989. But also, if we think of this question about when was Romania communist, if we think back to 1944, so there were only about 800 members of the Communist Party in the country, because it was illegal until the Red Army arrived. But there hadn't been a great popular base for a left-wing movement, so compared with Czechoslovakia, for instance, where the communists got about 38% of the popular vote, and where there were hundreds of thousands of active members of the party in its affiliated groups. So in Romania, communism had always been to a great extent something dictated from above and outside. That helps to explain the popularity of Ceausescu's defiance of the Soviet Union in 1968. He was seen as being, if you like, anti-Russian as much as anything else. And so I often feel that the answer to this question, when did Romania cease to be communist, is more, was it ever communist in the first place? And that the events since 1989 suggest how shallow the support for any kind of communist system had been, and in a way, how the potential for change was much greater once the shackles of that system were released.
The Jewish writer Ludovic Bruckstein grew up in the Romanian town of Sighet, which is right up in the north of Romania on the border with what's now Ukraine. At the time of his youth, Sighet had a flourishing Jewish community and a strong Hasidic tradition. But in spring 1944, Ludo Bruckstein, together with his parents and his 3 siblings and the entire Jewish community of Sighet, were rounded up and sent to Auschwitz. Ludo was transferred from Auschwitz to Bergen-Belsen and then on to a series of labour camps. But he managed to survive and return to Sighet, where he discovered that the only remaining person in his family was his younger brother Israel. Ludo had always loved writing, and after the war he began to write plays. One of the plays that he wrote in 1947 was called Nachtschicht in Yiddish, or Night Shift. This play is based on a true story of the revolt of the Sonderkommando at Auschwitz, and it was played to great acclaim in Yiddish theatres in Bucharest and in Iași between 1947 and 1958, and many Jewish and non-Jewish audiences alike went to see it. Freddie Bruckstein, who is Ludo Bruckstein's son, who now lives in Tel Aviv, has chosen an extract from this play, which we're going to hear tonight. It is, as far as we know, the first time that this has ever been heard in English. It was translated into Romanian, but not as far as we know, into English. And we would dearly love to be able to raise funds to be able to translate the whole of the play, which we would like to put on at the festival next year. I'm going to read you an extract from a letter which a certain Mr. Schechter sent to Ludo Bruckstein in 1978. Some 25 years ago, when I was still a child, the Jewish theatre troupe arrived from Bucharest in my provincial town, Berlad, bringing Ludovic Bruckstein's play Night Shift. It was set in Auschwitz, the drama was powerful, the audience wept, and I was left with the conviction that such a play could only be written by a writer who died along with his characters. Years later, when I met him at the literature school in Bucharest, I was very disappointed that he was still alive. To reassure me, he confessed that he had indeed died in Auschwitz, and also when he wrote the play, and above all when the censors forced him to make changes to it. But he was constantly forced to return to life, since he had a host of obligations as a husband, a father, and a writer. I'm now going to invite Lisa Forel, screenwriter, director and actor, whose great-grandmother was born in a shtetl in Romania but later moved to Austria, to read an extract in English and then in Yiddish from Ludo Bruckstein's play Nachtschicht.
In this extract, I am reading 3 or 4 characters, all men. Quite modern, isn't it? Now, in the bit I'm reading, a Sonderkommando comes back to the barracks after so-called work, and having seen the body of his dead mother in the gas chamber, he is planning a very daring uprising. Now, this sort of thing was well documented. And for those of you who don't know, the Sonderkommando, or the Special Command, were a group of prisoners in the Nazi death camps, mostly Jews, who were forced to shove the gassed and dead bodies into the crematoria. In this case, the uprising was successful because the crematorium was blown up, several Nazi guards were killed, but unfortunately only 3 or 4 of the Sonderkommando survived, having run into the woods to find the partisan groups nearby. I am going to read first in English and then in the original Yiddish. Let go. Let go of me. Jacob, calm down. What's he saying? Did you say I'm supposed to calm down? Do you have any idea what I did? Do you have any idea with these hands of mine? Stop shouting, Jacob. Somebody might come. And don't forget, we have a plan. Oh yeah. For such things, there is no punishment good enough. Everyone will be avenged. When it's over, not one single murderer will be left unpunished. Oh, really? You think that not one single murderer will be left unpunished? Do you know who I personally pushed into the oven? Do you have any idea? Children. Bodies of children. Babies. Bodies of old people. Heads shaven. All gassed. And then I recognized some of them. And I stood still, stuck to the floor, and then the bastard of a Nazi came towards me and said, "Why are you standing there? Continue, get going." And then I stretched out my muscles and I lifted the hot iron tongs of the fire above my head. But those hot iron tongs didn't even scratch the surface of the Nazi's head, just standing 2 feet away from me. But they did manage to push into the fire the body of my mother. Mama. Go back. Go back to work. Don't let anyone do anything as foolish as I. Whatever happens, you have to remain still, calm. Shh. I hear steps. Jacob, pull yourself together. We have a plan and you have a role to play. We have a plan, and it's payback time. Not 1 for 1, but all for all. With interest. 100 times. 1,000. Lotz mich ab! Jakob, beruhig sich. Was? Was sagt er? Ich soll sich beruhigen? Du weißt, was ich hab getan? Ihr weißt, was ich hab getan? Mit Ott die Hände meiner? Schrei nicht. Jakob, zum Ende zu kommen. Du vergisst, wir haben einen Plan. Haha, ist nicht voran kein Straf. Als Ding wird bezahlt. Bis zum so bleibt kein Schum mehr, nicht unbestraft. Oh ja, ist kein Schum mehr, dann bleibt unbestraft. Ihr weißt, ob wenn ich hab reingestoßen im Ofen mit all die Hände meiner. Ihr weiß, wenn Kinder, Körper von Kindern, seinem Fahrgaster, Abgeschorene, hab ich der kennt und bin da geblieben. Und damit hat die beste Fritz sich geschert zu mir und sagt, ja, was machen Sie da? Warum stehen Sie da? Weitergehen, weiter! Dann, die Muskeln meiner Hoden sich ausgestreckt, die Hände hoben und gehabt, das einzeln das grobe, benedicke Eizen hat nicht schäpert dem Kopf von der Fritz noch 2 Schritte von mir. Nein, nur es hat reingestippt im Feuer den Körper von meiner Mama. Mama. Geh zurück der Arbeit, beruhigt die Menschen, soll an anderen nicht tun, dieselbe Nachrichkeit. Seid sollen sein ruhig, was soll nicht geschehen. Herr, ein Schritt. Beherrscht sich, vergesst, wir haben einen Plan. Du hast eine Rolle. Ja, wir haben einen Plan. Wir werden bezahlt. Nicht einer für einen, nur alle für alle. Keffel, Kefflerheim. 100 Mal. Nein, 1000.
We would like to conclude this evening by playing a short film from the 2013 festival, which I will leave Lucy to introduce and to have the last word. But before I go, I would like to thank you all so much for taking part and for your kindness and generosity towards the festival. I look forward very much to seeing you as soon as we are able in London, Bucharest, or the Lake District. But most of all, I look forward to seeing everybody all together in Rickish in September 2021.
I had never done a book festival before, but I knew what I didn't want. I asked friends, and most important of all, family, of course. In 2013, kind guests, speakers, volunteers, all descended on Rickish in the middle of Transylvania, an old Saxon village. And I very much hope to keep the book festival within these village surroundings. They are incredibly important, but also because of the extraordinary richness of the culture, the literature, the music, the poetry that is embedded in them as well. So this is a very short film, an extract from a longer one. It lasts about 2 minutes, but it will give you a sense, I hope, of the speakers. Tony Scotland is remarkable, talking about his first visit to Romania under Ceausescu and how it's changed, And indeed, Romania changes the whole time, as indeed does the book festival, subject to subject, book to book. But it also gives you a sense of the wonderful churches, from the ground plans to visually, the extraordinary landscape, and the marvellous people who took a punt on the Transylvanian Book Festival and came for the first time in 2013. And we very much hope to see you all next year in September 2021 for yet another, I hope, stimulating and exciting programme, which is also one great big party as well. Thank you so much.
I learned about Transylvania first of all by coming here under Ceausescu, and I haven't been back since then. That was 1989. Now that I've come back after all these years and found this transformation, the look in the eye. It's free, open. People look and smile. They didn't when I was here last. They can do as they please. They may be poor, but they are free. That's the biggest change. Anything can happen once you've got that.
I really discovered Romania through these authors and really learnt to love it. And I think that's what this literary festival is all about, is discovering Romania through other people's eyes, through other people's words, and through the authors that are here.
Kind of unique experience, and I feel quite lucky to have been kind of a part of it.